So before I go to bed here, I want to share a story with you. Imagine a college classroom with a bunch of students. Imagine them all sitting at the desk. They're waiting on the professor, right? Professor walks in and begins writing math problems on the chalkboard. He writes 5 math problems. 5. Writes the first math problem. Classroom silent. Writes the second one. Classroom silent. And then he writes the third math problem. And you could hear behind him the classroom chuckling. Professor pays no attention to it. He writes the fourth math problem. You still hear chuckling. Then he finishes it with the fifth one. And even though the chuckling's not as loud, you can still hear it. And as the professor turns around, the professor's looking at his class, and they're all trying to hold their grin, trying not to smile, trying not to laugh, right? So the professor asks his class, "Guys, what's so funny?" And he's saying this with a half grin himself. The girl in the middle of the class raises her hand, and she says, "Professor, the third one's wrong." And then before the professor could even say anything, the young man in the front row says, "Yeah, and Professor, that was the easiest problem out of all 5. The professor starts chuckling as the class chuckles. And the professor said, "That's what I want to talk to you guys about today." And another student at the back of the class said, "You're going to teach math instead of sociology today?" And the professor laughed a little bit, and then he got serious, and he said, "When I wrote the first 2 problems on the board, you were quiet. Arguably, because I was writing those math problems in sociology class, you were outside of your comfort zone, and you were trying to find a way to be comfortable. You didn't know what I was doing. So until you knew what I was doing, you didn't say or do anything." And then the class kind of took that in and said, "Yeah, we were," because they were curious. And he said, "And then when I came to the third problem on the board, I wrote it wrong, and you all laughed at me. And as I wrote the fourth one correctly, you laughed at me still. And as I wrote the fifth one correctly, you laughed at me still." And about this time, the students all started really looking at the professor. And he said, "I want to tell you something. Today I want to teach you about what the real world is like. And what better place than sociology class to teach this." He said, "As I wrote these problems on the board," he said, "I wrote 5 for a reason." He said, "Out of them 5, I made one mistake. You hung on to that mistake and laughed at me, regardless of what I did. Not one of you mentioned that I got 4 out of 5 right, but you were quick to mention my mistake, and also quick to mention that my mistake was with the most simplest form up there on the board." And he said, "I want to tell you something, and I want to tell you. No matter what you do in life, everybody has made mistakes. And those mistakes, just like that professor, you're going to be ridiculed, you're going to be laughed at, Some people will never let go of your mistakes. But the truth is, like that class, it's so ingrained in people, people don't even realize they're doing it. That's why it's important that, like the professor ignored that class on purpose, we've got to ignore that class called civilization on purpose. We got to do for us. You got to do for you. I've got to do for me. In just over a month, I'll be traveling to Chicago, and I'll be speaking to the largest children's literary group in the country, the SCBWI, the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I'm going to be going up there and give a 2-hour presentation on what I love to do. If I had listened to my class, meaning the people in my life that told me I can't do something or laughed at me, or people who've wanted to remind me of my past, I wouldn't be going to Chicago. And because I'm going to Chicago, if I wasn't going, this group would not be renewing my membership for free for another year. They're going to renew my membership for coming up and giving a presentation to them. None of that would happen. I wouldn't have sold 1,000 books in 4 months this year if I believed in what other people laughed at. So you got to remember, people's natural instinct is to remember where you make your mistakes. But it only comes back to haunt you if you let it come back. You know, other people's perceived reality of you never, ever has to be your reality. Because I can tell you, some of the most successful people in the world are still ridiculed. They're still called a joke. But they keep going and they keep succeeding. So as I get ready to turn in here tonight, it's actually almost 11 o'clock, so it's about an hour early. Yay! Don't let people get to you. I know that's easy to say, right? But don't let people distract you. Stay focused. So as I get ready to turn in for the night, I don't even know you. But I believe if you stay focused, man, you got it. So, we all have mistakes. Rise above yours and take on the world. You can do it. Later.